Elliot's Loft is where When Black Men Talk is recorded and distributed. I want to thank you for giving us an ear. I'm your host, Mark Elliott. Been at this for quite some time, and while doing this, from time to time, things just kind of come, and sometimes they come as a small thought or a small idea. That's how God gives it to you. But He kind of just rolls it to you and kind of see what you can do with it. And one morning I woke up, and the line to me, "Up from the ashes," just hit me. And I was like, okay, "Up from the ashes. What can that really be?" Thought about it for a little while and really wasn't coming across anything. So went on with the day, and as the day progressed, it clarified itself some. And to me, it came up from the ashes is where we start, and basically how we come from the ashes and we live our life and we go through different things in life, trials, tribulations, different things. And sometimes while we're living our lives, we're not thinking God is near, but He's always near. And we get to a point in life where we develop and we look back, and sometimes we don't even know how we transfer from one point to the next. But with all that being said and done, that's of the glory of God. And that's what Up from the Ashes is basically about. So it's another layer, another branch that we're going to be doing here when Black Men Talk. And some will say, in a sense, it could be a testimony. I'm not going to go that far and say, but if someone was to say, that's what it really is, I wouldn't argue with them because we should always be testifying to the goodness that He's done for us and how He carries us. So for this episode, you know her, you know her. She's been a few times, well spoken. It's always a delight to have her on. Dr. Marci Baptiste is going to be doing Up from the Ashes. And Marcy, I'm going to take you back to when you were a little weedy little girl, and we'll start from there, and we'll come on up if that's okay with you.
All right, that sounds like a plan. So, grew up in Iowa. Um, some would call it to a single mom. Didn't feel like she was a single mom for much of the time because I had my stepfather was in the home for much of the time when I was really young. I think he came into our family, into our home when I was about 5 or 6. I think he came in maybe a little sooner, probably before I knew, and then but moved in when I was around 6, kindergarten age. And I think that's where my story kind of really starts, is at that point. A little before that, there was some situation where I desperately wanted my father to be in my life. I had this vision that my dad was going to be my superhero. And, coming up, you see the families on TV. And at that time, it was Brady Bunch or whatever. It was the Jeffersons. You saw fathers in the home. And I think the Brady Bunch was impactful for me. One, because there's a girl on there named Marsha. So that obviously, but the other part of it was that it was a blended family. And that's what my family became. But ultimately, I still always wanted my biological father. I wanted to know my dad. I knew that I had an older brother, and I desperately wanted to know him. I desperately wanted a relationship with him because one of the things that I hated the most about my life growing up was being an only child and not having really anybody to share experiences with, to share fears with. And so I had kind of created in my mind what this vision of this family was going to look like. And so when my stepfather came into the picture, I was extremely happy. But it turned sour really quickly. And I think by the time we moved, he had lived with us for maybe 3 years, 4 years. So I think I was in about fourth grade, and my mom bought a house and we moved. He moved with us. And I don't remember before moving into the house things really being bad. Uh, I remember things being relatively calm, cool, collected, whatever. I don't remember a lot of trauma or dysfunction or anything like that. But it just could be because either I maybe blocked some of it out, or I was just too young to really kind of understand the dynamics in the house. Um, but when I was 4, my mom bought a house. We moved, so I had to change schools at that time. So I'm shifting my friends. I'm in a neighborhood that I'm not familiar with, um, and then that's when I really observed violence happening in my home. And my stepfather was very abusive to my mother. Every Friday, like clockwork, uh,
Hmm.
payday would come, and we'd go to the bank first, and she'd cash paychecks or whatever. She'd do her banking, and across the street was a taco place. And I still love the taco place to this day. I still go there to this day every time I go home. My favorite taco place. And I would get tacos, and then from there we would go and get Kentucky Fried Chicken, and she and my stepfather would have KFC for dinner.
Let me stop
And
you. Let me stop you
yeah.
right there 1 second, if you don't mind, Mars. From time to time, I
Mhm.
will jump in, but I want, if you don't mind, I want to go back to, because I think you said you were 10, and on Fridays the abuse would start. What is going through a little girl's head when her mother is being abused?
So I wasn't 10 yet. I was like third or fourth grade. So I was maybe 8, 9, somewhere around in there.
Mhm.
Um, so what was going through my head was I remember just hearing, like, you just hear the sounds, um, the yelling, the screaming, the smells. And so for me, and that's why I was getting to that point in the story, because the Kentucky Fried Chicken is a pivotal part of the story, because that's how quickly things shifted. And so we would literally be sitting down and having dinner on a Friday night. And then the next time I saw this person, he was a monster that I didn't even recognize. And hours before that, everything was fine. People were laughing, having dinner. It was a very normal experience. And then he would leave and go out. And when he would come home, I would smell the alcohol, and I would hear like him, kind of banging into stuff. Um, I didn't know what the smell was at the time. And then that's when I would hear like the yelling, the screaming, the arguing, the fighting. And the progression into physical violence. You can hear stuff being knocked over. You can hear her being hit. You can hear, um, her pleas for him to, just stop. It's unnecessary, that kind of thing. And for me, I would just hide in my closet and try and cover my ears and really just try and block it out and pretend that it wasn't happening. And so in the moment, it was more so just fear, I think, that when the noise stopped that she'd be dead. And but I really couldn't, I didn't feel safe to leave my room, so I couldn't really go check. And so it was usually not until the next day that I would know. And so it was hard to go to sleep at night. It was hard to not know what was happening. And then the next day, yeah, she was still alive. Yeah, okay, everything's all right. And by the afternoon, it was like nothing happened again. And so you're you're trying to process this, like, am what why would you now be friends with this person again? Because I couldn't understand, like, if one of my friends hit me or beat me up, I wouldn't want to be their friend anymore. And this would go, I mean, this was, like I said, it was a cycle. That was every single week. That's how it went. And so by Sunday, everything's completely back to normal. So Saturday was usually a little sketch. He was gone much of the morning. Then by the afternoon, early evening, he'd be back home. Everything would be calm, but it would still be tense. And then by Sunday, it was like nothing ever happened on Friday night. I'm like, are these people crazy? And this literally went on until I was about 13 years old. And by that point, it had escalated so much, and it was so common and so frequent. And, in between those times, I would have these conversations with my mother, like, why don't you just leave? I didn't understand why in heaven's name would you stay if this person beats you up. Now, mind you, this is through the mindset of a child. I don't understand what it means that the house is just in my name. I can't just leave my house, that's not an option. Um, I didn't understand domestic violence. I didn't understand cycles of violence. Like all of the things that I now understand, I didn't know back then. And so to me, it was just like, she's dumb. Like you got to be stupid. Why would you do this? And so by the time I was 13, I tried to, it was a Friday night, and I tried to intercept, kind of get in the way and get him off of her. They were kind of in the living room. Normally they would be like in the bedroom, but for whatever happened that night, they were in the living room, or the dining room, which was right outside my bedroom door. And so, I'm 13 at that point. So I come out and I try and stop it. And then he tried to hit me. And so I was terrified. I ran outside. It was snow. I didn't have no shoes on. I didn't have no coat on, just my nightgown, and no shoes, no socks, no nothing, standing in the snow, screaming hysterically, crying. It was just a whole scene. And my mom finally brought me coat and shoes and all this kind of stuff, trying to get me to come back in the house. And I refused. And then I stayed with my aunt for a little while, a couple days. And then I ended up just kind of going back and forth from houses to houses, but I wouldn't come home. And I told my mom, I said, if that's how you want to live your life, that's on you. But no, I'm not coming back as long as he's there. And it took her months, like 3 or 4 months, to end the relationship. And so I internalized a lot during this whole period of time because, like I said, being an only child, I didn't have anywhere to put it. I didn't have anybody to help me unpack it. We grew up in a time where what's done in the house stays in the house, what's done in the dark is going to stay in the dark. You don't talk about grown folks' business, you stay in a child's place. Like, we had all of these things that we were taught and told, where there was never really an opportunity for me to understand or learn how to unpack any of this. So before I ended up running away from home, maybe the year before that, I had started going over to a friend's house, another family member on his side, and his younger brother molested me when I was 12. And in that moment, I really just knew that men couldn't be trusted. And I remember with the molestation, the first time, him telling me that nobody would believe me. You don't say anything, and if you do, they're gonna blame you, but they're not gonna believe that I did anything. It's gonna be your fault, everything like that. And the next day, I talked to one of my cousins, and I was talking to her about it. I said, "Did you see that? Does he do that to you?" She was like, "What are you talking about?" And she legit acted like she didn't know what the hell I was talking about. So that reinforced what he said, that nobody's going to believe me. And so I literally felt like I didn't have an outlet. There was no safe space. Like, I was going there to avoid the violence at home, and then get over there, and now I'm being molested. And so then I stopped going over there. And then that following year was when I ended up running away. And so a lot of things were internalized. I built up a lot of beliefs about myself, my space in the world, about men, about relationships, about what's safe, what's not safe. Um, and I never ever told anybody. I never talked about it. I didn't talk about the molestation. I didn't talk about the abuse ever until 30 plus years later, when it happened to me. But during that time, I had told my mom, basically, you're stupid, and if that's your choice, then you live your life like that. But that'll never be me. But one of the critical components and things, beliefs that I formulated for myself was that, because she always said, I'm not gonna, I just can't leave because I don't know if I can afford the house by myself. Now, mind you, I'm not understanding home ownership or any of that stuff, but what I'm hearing is, finance is safety. So as long as I make enough money that I don't have to rely on a man, I'll be safe. And it wasn't until, like I said, 30 years later, I'm a 6-figure earner. I'm an executive of a bank. And I found myself in a physically violent relationship. Relationships prior to that were, verbally abusive, psychologically, like just one bad choice after another. And again, it just reinforced all of these beliefs that I had about my safety and my place in the world and my value as a person, my value as a woman. That even though I knew better and I made the money, it still happened to me. Granted, there's a big fast forward in between there, but throughout my marriage, even getting married, I got married when I was 21. I was pregnant with my first daughter, and I met him when I was 17. We'd been together, but the reason why we got together was because I was looking for somebody safe, because the relationships prior to that, one wanted to have sex, I wasn't ready, so he broke up with me. And then the second one wanted to have sex, I wasn't ready, but I did it, and I got pregnant the very first time and ended up having to have an abortion. So when I met my husband, he was very quiet, he was very reserved, kind of guy that really wouldn't hurt a flea. And at that point in my life, that's what I needed. I needed to know I wasn't going to be hurt. I never thought about, am I going to be happy? Does this make sense for me? I didn't really want to get married, but at that point, then I got pregnant. I'd already had an abortion. So an abortion was off the table. And I'm 20 years old. So I'm out of high school by this point. The first time I was 17, it was my senior year of high school. And I just felt like my whole life would have been over. I know looking back, hindsight 2020, I would have been okay. I would have figured it out. But back then I didn't feel that way, because I had all of these belief systems about my value that said I'm incapable. I can't do things for myself. I'm not, like women are not capable. Men have all the power. Like all of these messed up beliefs that I had at that time. And so when I got pregnant with my daughter, then that's when I agreed to get married, because I didn't want her to grow up without her father, because I legit by that point felt like if my dad had been in my life, none of that other stuff would have happened. I wouldn't have had a stepfather. I wouldn't have gotten molested. I wouldn't have, I would have learned about relationships, or he would have vetted my boyfriends, and that would have somehow protected me. Like, this is all the crazy stuff that's going through my head. And because I didn't have that, I didn't want her to have that, because then I didn't want her to have those same outcomes. And so again, because there was all this trauma that was unprocessed and unresolved, it was just open-ended, one trauma after the other, and the portal never got closed on them. The doors all stayed open. And so then that would be my reference point for every decision that I would make. I would go back to those doors of different traumas. Okay, what kept me safe here? And understanding that you can't live life on survival skills. You can survive on survival skills, but you can't live. And there's a difference. And the domestic violence was kind of the thing that changed everything. You talked about in the introduction about how, God's always there. When I asked for, we were also joking one time about Jesus being on the main line. And I remember growing up and going to church with my granny and singing that song with my whole heart, because I believed that I could call Jesus and I could tell Jesus all my problems and he would fix it. But I called him when my mom was being abused and he didn't fix it. So now that created a distrust, like, that's not true. So now I'm questioning everything. I question, my religious beliefs. I questioned faith. I questioned God. I hated God for a long time because he didn't fix it. I prayed. I wrote in my journal. I called and he didn't pick up. You know, growing up, I think I thought that there was going to be this audible voice that when you pray, like you're supposed to hear something back, like he's supposed to talk back to you. I didn't understand how it all worked, but it didn't happen. And so how can I trust that God's going to fix it and he's going to be there and all these other things? And so I had to come through like this sort of reckoning as far as my faith goes. And that started because I had complications with my pregnancy with my first daughter. Well, both my pregnancies actually. But it was the complication with my first daughter where I was going to church with my sister-in-law at the time. And it was more for she wanted me to go. I wasn't wholly necessarily going for myself, but I was starting to learn about less about religion and more about faith. And decided to get baptized. And I remember praying about my pregnancy, and they thought my daughter was either going to have Down syndrome or spina bifida based on how these tests came back. And that was the first time I had prayed since I was a little girl. It was the first time I was like, I'm going to try it again. And if he messes this one up, we might have to break up forever. But I prayed, and a few weeks later, I had an amniocentesis, and the results came back, and she was fine. And I think that was sort of a shift for me as far as my faith goes, where I kind of was like, maybe it does work. Maybe I can trust God again. Maybe I didn't pray right when I was younger. But I just understood more, I think, being older about how faith works. When my other grandmother, when she passed away, um, there was some questioning God then too. But once I prayed about my pregnancy and quote, quote, he fixed it, then that shifted my faith. And so I was able to, and I learned to rely a little bit more on faith and less about worrying as much about outcomes of certain situations. So then, let's see, I'm 20 something at that point. Get pregnant with my second daughter 3 years later, and I was due in February. My water broke in November, a couple days before Thanksgiving, and I thought she was gonna die. They put me on bed rest. I couldn't get out of my bed for 6 weeks until she was big enough, and so I ended up having her January 4th. And the whole time, like I prayed, like I never prayed before. And she was fine. She was little, but she was, a normal sized baby. She was like 5'9" by that point. I think when my water broke, she was maybe 4 pounds. Um, and so, he fixed it. She grew, her heart was okay. She had all of her fingers and toes. Um, and so I think that gave me a little bit more courage and a little bit more faith, and was like, okay, maybe God really is there. Maybe he does listen. Maybe I am important enough that he hears me too. Because for a long time I thought that he didn't listen the first time because I wasn't important. And so now I'm realizing, okay, well, either I'm important or these little girls are important. One of the two. Go through my marriage. It's ups and downs. I'm stuffing. I'm repressing. I'm not talking about how I'm feeling. I'm not communicating. But I never wanted to get married. I just didn't want this kid to be an only child. So I have the second baby, which means now I got to stay married to this guy. But I always knew that I was going to get divorced. I always knew that, but the goal was to get them both through high school, and I didn't quite make it. My oldest daughter was a senior when I asked for the divorce. But I stuffed a lot of things down, literally and figuratively. I poured everything into my kids and my career. And so my career continued to rise, and, accolades and recognition and awards and, all that kind of stuff. But at home, behind the scenes, my husband was very resentful for that. Now, mind you, he was the one with the new car every year, every other year, and designer name clothes and the motorcycle and, all of these extras that my income provided. But he resented the hell out of me for it. And he didn't mind telling me that, you're not the boss here. You're not my manager. And, you think you're all this because you got this title and you ain't, you're not all that. Um, but I held on because I took my vows. I took them seriously, and I was committed to getting these kids through school until they were old enough to be able to kind of do things on their own a little bit. And I kind of viewed like, okay, they'll be ready. They'll get through high school. They'll go to college. And when they go to college, then divorce, boom, it's on. But I didn't quite make it that far. Um, and then, like I said, when I got out of the relationship or out of the marriage, entered into dating was different. I wasn't, a 14, 15, 16-year-old girl anymore. I'm a old grown ass executive with two kids. And the scene looked different. Technology was different. Um, but I wasn't different. I didn't feel like I grew at all spiritually. Well, spiritually, yeah, from a faith standpoint. But as far as my soul, I don't feel like it grew. Um, my belief systems didn't really change that much. I still didn't feel or understand what my value was beyond my career. So career wise, I knew I was a rock star, but personally, I was a train wreck inside, mentally, emotionally, all of that. And so it was like you get out into this dating arena, and it was kind of like being thrown to the wolves, trying to just figure it out. And the guys that I was attracted to were the bad boys. And I didn't know why. Um, it was later that I realized that a lot of that attraction for those bad boys was their kind of tough guy image. And so it was me still looking for a protector. My husband wasn't a protector. He was very soft spoken and non confrontational, other than to tell me what I was and wasn't. But as far as being able to protect me, he never gave me that energy. So kind of these bad boy type guys, that was it. And it so happened I met one. He was actually I met him in the parking lot of a bar. And he was definitely a bad boy. I mean, he was selling drugs at the time, and I think later on, I think I found out he was even on the run and all kinds of stuff. Um, but what I will tell you about him, and this is what I firmly believe why we cannot judge a book by its cover, was he was the first person who kept it 100 with me on every front and every level. And I remember him telling me, "How long have you been divorced?" And I think at the time it was like maybe a year. I don't even think we were actually divorced. I think we were still separated and going through the divorce. So I think I was on my own for like a year at that point. And I remember us talking and him telling me, "This ain't what you think. It ain't what you think it is out here. So I don't know what you left in your marriage, but let me peep you to some game." And he said, "There's one thing that I'll never do, and that's I'll never lie to you." And that was, gosh, 25 years ago. And to my knowledge, he never has. We're still friends to this day. And I mean, we've been through it, as you know, but he is still one of the people that I trust the most from the standpoint of, he said, "I'll never lie to you. Nothing that I do will ever darken your doorstep." So, when I say that I don't want people to know about our relationship, it ain't about me being ashamed of you. It's about me protecting you. He said, "I don't want my world to cross yours. You got too much to lose." he cared more about what I had to lose than I did at that point. And it never did. And he got into some stuff, and it ended up taking him. He ended up going back to prison, and we maintained our friendship throughout all of that. And, you know, he's been out now for many, many years, and he's just a really great guy. But if you would have judged the book by the cover, I would have missed that. But he did teach me a lot of things about relationships, how to conduct myself, things that I, you know, need to be mindful of. He said, "You're too trusting." Like, you just tell everybody everything. You can't do that, you know. And so there were many times, like he said, "I'll never lie to you." And he said, "Now, you know, I might not always like what I say, but I'll never lie to you. I'll always tell you the truth. I'm always going to keep it 100 with you." And sure enough, he hurt my feelings a few times, but we set some really good ground rules, and he set some ground rules for me for dating that stuck with me, and I do believe kept me safe in a lot of different ways. But through the divorce, man, everybody hated me because I had done such a great job of making everything look like it was fine. Had the mask on perfectly, the career was good, you got the brick house on the hill in the nice neighborhood, Labrador retrievers, like literally it looked like it was picture perfect. You know, these 2 kids, 2-parent household, like everything everybody said it was supposed to be. But I hated my life. I hated being married to my husband. And when I asked for the divorce, I mean, it was only my good friends that stuck by me. My kids hated me. Obviously my ex-husband hated me. He still is not a big fan even to this day, and it's been 20 plus years ago. But I remember bringing it back to you know, God really always being there. I remember I was so broken at one point in the divorce, and I had nobody. Like, I felt like everybody had turned their back on me. I felt like everybody had picked his side, that I had disappointed everybody, and that I was, you know, the ogre, I'm the monster, I'm the terrible person because, you know, I upset everybody's apple cart. I turned everyone's world upside down, and I'm trash. And I remember being at church, and they did altar call, and I went up to the altar and I kneeled down, and I was just broken, for lack of a better word. I just felt broken. And I remember praying so hard, like, God, I can't do this. And it was about my daughters. Like, I can't do this. I had given everything for them, and they hated me. And I'm like, I've done everything I can do. I can't do nothing else. They're yours. Figure it out, fix it, or don't. I don't know. And I remember somebody come up and they just kind of put their arm on, or their hand on my on my shoulder. And I'm still praying, and I'm just like, hoping this works, because I ain't got nothing else. I don't got nothing else to give. And I remember when somebody touched my shoulder, I don't know who it was, and I'm just sobbing, just uncontrollably. And at whatever point, I pull myself together, I leave the altar, and about 3 weeks later, things started to turn around. It wasn't perfect by any means, but it had gotten it started getting better. And I started to see a light at the end of the tunnel. And I knew then that was the confirmation that God got me. I might get myself into some stuff, but even if I get myself into it, and even though he can't fix it per se, he got me. And so that was a big shift for me when I really kind of learned how to really develop more of a relationship with God versus having religion. And so even to this day, I'll say I'm far more spiritually connected and more relationship with God versus organized religion. So when you say God's always there, 100%, he definitely is. And then through the dating experiences, like I said, alluded to earlier, all over the place. They were not, none of them were good. None of them were constructive. None of them were positive experiences. I made way more mistakes than I made good decisions. high risk, low reward behaviors, dysfunction on full display, and a complete disregard for everything that I had to lose. I was out there in my kind of YOLO stage, or I don't even call it a whole phase or whatever it was, but I was wilding for a while. And I was too old and I had too much to lose to be acting that way. But for whatever reason, it didn't even occur to me. And the domestic violence, when I got into that relationship, um, the relationship prior, the guy was very narcissistic. I was with him for 3 years. I walked out of that relationship more empty than I walked into it, more dysfunctional than I entered into it. I didn't know. I was really convinced, like, there ain't gonna be nobody out there. That it's me. Men are trash, but it's me. And so when I met the guy that ended up in that last relationship with, he was like, I was everything. I was great. Suddenly I was amazing. Suddenly I was worth being put up on this pedestal and treated like a princess and, all of these things. But there were so many red flags along the way that let me just brush that off. That's bad behavior. Yeah. And just like all of my previous relationships, they all had substance abuse problems. My stepfather, my molester, the boys that I dated, they're drinking, smoking weed too much, all kinds of stuff. Um, and it was no different. He was just like that, but he made me feel good about myself until he didn't anymore. And it ended in him kicking down my door, physically assaulting me, holding me hostage. And to this day, I don't know how I got out of the house because I tried several times and like blocked the door, slammed the door on me. Um, but God got me out because I remember even in the midst of all of that, I was afraid to fight back because I didn't want to make it worse. But I remember praying and I was just like praying that God would get me out of it. And I remember telling him, if you get me out of this, I'll do something with the time that you give me back. You won't regret it. I won't make you regret it. I promise. I'll do better. I won't make you regret it. I'll do something great. Child, I didn't know what that was going to look like. I didn't know what I was going to do, how I was going to do it. I didn't know what kind of expectations there would be on my life based on that. Um, but to this day, I honestly don't know how I got out. But I did. And my abuser, boyfriend, whatever you want to call him, offender, as he was backing out of the driveway, he said, if anything happens to me or anything happens to my family, I'm going to come back and I'm going to kill you. And I believed him because 3 weeks before that, his first cousin had stabbed his pregnant girlfriend 36 times in a hotel room and murdered her. So it was genetic. So I had no reason not to believe him. He knew where I worked. He knew where all my friends lived, everything. So the police were not nice. Basically, it was like, well, you're not going to tell us who did it. Have a good day. We're not going to help you. Nothing we can do. So I got a restraining order. And then I remember the night that it happened, I went to my friend's house and was standing in her bathroom. And I'm looking at myself in the mirror and I'm just unrecognizable. I'm just like, who in the hell are you? How did you get here? And that question just kept reverberating in my head. Like, how did you get here? You knew better. You watched this happen to your mom. You said this would never be you. You make enough money. Like, why are you, what, what is wrong with you? How did you get here? How did I get here? Who am I? And that was the moment when I realized that I had to do something different. Because the next day I thought, I'm the common denominator. They don't know each other. All all anybody knows is me. I'm letting these people in my life. I'm giving these people access to me, but why? And one of my good friends, she's found this support group for me to go to for domestic violence survivors. And I remember thanking her. Um, but I mean, there was even in that, there were things, going to work the next day after that all happened. And, your eyes are both black and blue and your lip is swollen and, your coworkers are looking at you like WTF, but they're afraid to ask. And I'm afraid to say anything. My friends are like, just call off work. And for whatever reason, just like I wouldn't stay at my friend's house that night that it happened, I insisted on going back home because I said, you know what? No, because if I don't go home, he wins again and I stay a victim. And that's how I kind of felt about going to work that following day. Well, then I should say the day after, because the very next day I ended up having to go to the ER because I couldn't move my neck and my eyes were both swollen shut. So I had to go get checked out at the ER. And that was my experience with the police and how I ended up getting a restraining order instead of um, pressing charges because they couldn't protect me. He knew everything about me everywhere I lived. There was nothing the police could do, and they even had to admit that. I said, what are you going to do? You're going to arrest him? He'll do 24 hours and be out on his own recognizance, and he's coming for me. He ain't coming for you. He made that very clear. So the following day, then I was when I went to work and, you know, making that decision to walk in those doors and have to explain again. I'd explained it 20 times at the hospital. I didn't know what I was going to say to my coworkers. I didn't know what I was going to say to my supervisor. I didn't know what I was going to say to my employees. But if I stayed home, I felt like he won again and I was still a victim. And I didn't want to be a victim anymore. And I think that was really the shift for me to fix it. If you don't want to be a victim, stop putting yourself in shit that's going to victimize you and stop associating with people who are going to mistreat you. But I had to figure out why I kept finding myself with these types of people, these people with substance abuse problems and anger issues and who wanted to control and who just wanted to use me for my money and my resources and all of these things. And I'm allowing them to do all those things because they was exactly what I wanted for whatever reason. So I couldn't even really be mad at them. I couldn't blame them because I was making choices, but I didn't know why. And so that's really what prompted the healing journey, was for me to figure out, how do I stop this cycle that I'm in? How do I stop choosing these people? Why am I choosing these people? And so when my friend told me about the support group, I was resistant. Like, no, I'm not domestic violence survivor. That's not what I am. This was just something that happened. I don't belong in that room. I don't belong with those people. I don't know who I thought those people were, but those people were my people. Those people were just like me. Those were women in that room, 15 plus women every single week telling their story. And it took me 4 weeks before I could even say my name because I was so messed up. I was so in denial, like I didn't want to be part of that. And so I tried to get out of it, but my friend, she pulled a fast one on me and actually took me and sat with me for the first 3 weeks. Otherwise, I probably would have never went. And by then, the fourth week, I was able to say my name, tell my story. And that was the beginning of me really starting to heal, was because I had to admit, number one, I'm making some really bad choices here. Number two, I do belong here. I do have a problem. I do need help. And those were all things that were very hard for me to admit. But it was the beginning of me completely reconstructing and changing my life. So when you talk about, being up from the ashes, it's being at that lowest point where you don't really see any other option. Like, change wasn't a choice. it was just safer than not changing. And I didn't want to be anybody's victim anymore ever again. And that meant I was the common denominator. So I'm the problem. Then I'm probably somewhere in here. There's probably a solution, but I'm going to need some help figuring that out. And so that's really 2 years healing journey. Didn't date, didn't go out, didn't drink alcohol, focused on physical fitness, working out. I learned everything I could about myself. I learned everything I could about domestic violence. I learned everything I could about relationships, how people get into these situations, understanding cycles of violence, understanding trauma, exploring my complex trauma from my childhood, exploring what messages and what belief systems were formulated from being molested, and my father not wanting anything to do with me, and all of these things. And I tell people now when I tell the story, that it was bad enough to change me, but not bad enough to kill me. And God has blessed me over the years with an ability to tell the story in a way that other people now don't feel like they're alone. They understand, like, yeah, I might have made some mistakes and I may have made a whole bunch of mistakes, but I don't have to be reduced to my worst moments. I can be something more than that. I don't have to be a victim all the time. Even if I was victimized, I don't have to be a victim, and I don't have to carry with me a victim mentality. So even when I speak about domestic violence, I frame myself more as a domestic violence champion than as a domestic violence survivor, because I don't want to just survive. I want to do more than that. I don't want to, you can't live in survival mode. You can't live on survival skills. Living means going beyond just surviving, and it's experiencing the full breadth of life, the full breadth of your experience, the full breadth of happiness and sadness and light and dark and joy. Like, you have to have it all. And survival doesn't let you have all of it. It only gives you little pieces. So that was sort of the beginning. And then that's, moved into, once I really realized that the trauma piece and connected some of those dots. And then I saw how substance abuse funneled into it. And I started really studying psychology and other things. It's just like, wow, had I known some of this stuff back then, so many things would have been different. I would have been equipped to handle situations in such a different way. And so that led me to kind of the work that I do now in substance abuse and trauma recovery and things like that. And I think what I walked away from the domestic violence with was survival as a responsibility. And that has stuck with me that was 2012, so 13 years ago. And that survival is a responsibility, what that meant to me, or what that means to me, is that my survival gave me a responsibility to help somebody else up, to be able to share knowledge and to use my experience, to use my platform as an author. So a lot of my books talk about it. My public speaking platform, I talk about it. My businesses, it's incorporated into everything I do. Starting a nonprofit, 9 Seconds, that's a critical component of it because it's about domestic violence prevention. And now moving on into my newest initiative, which is called the Silent Sons Initiative. I'm still getting everything together on that, but how that came about is part of 9 Seconds, but it's really centered around helping men, because I have come to realize through many conversations, counseling with hundreds of people, but a lot of men in particular, is that if my abusers had dealt with their substance abuse, dealt with their trauma, had a way to learn how to emotionally regulate, to express themselves in a different way, maybe they would have made a different choice and the violence didn't have to happen. And so when I look at our communities and things like that, I want men to be able to have that space where they can become the person I wish my dad had been for their families, that safe space, that harbor. So that's where we are today. Substance abuse counseling, trauma recovery, domestic violence prevention, and then now moving into um, the work that I'm going to be doing with men, and really just becoming an advocate for them to be able to have that safe space. And if you are a guy who has harmed someone, I don't want you to feel like that even defines you. I don't feel like anybody should be reduced to their worst moments or their worst decisions. And so if you are a man who has, been violent with your partner, been violent with children, your children, beating your children or beating your spouse or whatever that case may be, I want you to have a safe space. I want you to be able to have a place to come and let's start unpacking some of that stuff. Because for me, unpacking it helped me to understand me. And then from understanding me better, I could learn new tools. And once I learned the new tools, I could show up differently in when I'm engaging with other people. And when it comes to relationships, I'm very, very clear about who I am, what kind of partner would be supportive for me. And so I don't find myself getting into situations like this because I can disqualify a potential relationship in a conversation, two conversations max. I don't have to be present with you and put myself in harm's way potentially to be able to tell that. And so being able to do that's important, but I want to be able to do that. I think women have a lot of resources out there. I think there's a lot of compassion for women who are struggling, and I don't see the same thing happening for men. And so I want to be able to be the other side of that, be my brother's keeper, be able to be that safe space for them and to be able to provide the tools and give them the perspective of, what it feels like on the other side. But I want you to be able to express yourself. I want you to feel heard, understood, and to like, let's unpack and process your trauma too. Because I think that we miss the mark on that a lot of times with men. And I feel like when men heal, then everybody and everything connected to them heals. Their children are better because of it. Their relationships are better because of it. Our communities are better because of it. We're not putting people in prison if they can make better decisions. If we can avoid some of that, then I think the world gets better. You're improving the human condition. If you can start seeing people for their humanity and realize that everybody's going to make mistakes, but they also have the ability to heal, they have the ability to recover, and they have the ability to be better. So if I can be a part of that, survival is my responsibility.
Dr. Marci Batiste, up from the ashes. Again, when something comes, you're not sure how it's going to basically unfold. And just to listen to you come along, it unfolded perfectly. It really did. I appreciate it. You share some things about you, of course, I didn't even know. And I love that you were able to do such. I love the fact that you felt comfortable enough to do such. And for me, that's it. That comfortability to allow you to open up and just share. Yeah,
Well, and I
that
think becoming comfortable with my story um, really was a big part of my healing because a friend of mine told me, one of my mentors when I wrote my first book, it's called Journey to Find Your Butterfly Potential. And when I wrote that book, I put all of my story in there. So, like you said, there's stuff you didn't even know. Because there's depending on whatever the situation is, I talk about bits and pieces and parts here and there. But Journey to Find Your Butterfly Potential had all of that in there. And there was stuff in there that nobody knew about me. So, when I wrote the book, he happened to call when I sent it to the publisher and he said, "Hey, what's going on? I'm just checking on you. How you doing?" And I said, "Oh, man, I just sent my book to the publisher." And he said, "Oh my gosh, that's great. I'm so proud of you, babe girl. Congratulations." And I said, he's like, "How do you feel?" And I said, "I just feel like crying and I'm scared." And he was like, "What? Why do you feel that way?" And I said, "Because there's stuff in there that nobody knows about me. Like I've always been so good at making things seem like they're okay. and things are so far from okay. And things have been so far from okay for a really long time. And so I've done things and I've made decisions and, things that people judge people for. And people think I'm a good person, but if they read that, then they might not think I'm such a good person. And I was distraught. And he said, "Did you tell the truth?" I said, "Yeah, I did." He said, "Did you tell the whole truth?" I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Well, here's what I'm going to tell you about the truth." And he said, "If you tell the truth, you tell the whole truth, it can never come back to hurt you. Once you put it out there, it can't hurt you anymore." And that was such a freeing piece of advice for me, because what it did for me was it allowed me to just be my authentic self. I was no longer worried about discovery. I didn't have to hide from somebody thinking I was something that I'm not. I'm fallible. I've messed up. I've made trash ass decisions in some cases, but I'm committed to being better. And so if there's nobody out there that can come to me and say, "Well, I heard this or that or the third about you, and you purport that you're this kind of person." Absolutely not. Because I always tell my story very authentically and very transparently. And I'm not afraid to say when I make mistakes or when I've messed up or when I made really bad decisions or wrong turns. Because I think we all do that, but we're all so afraid to admit that we've done that. That's where all those secrets hide. And that's what abuse and trauma and pain, that's it thrives in that darkness. And so you've got to bring it out into the light. And so once I understood that about speaking my truth and being vulnerable and really making vulnerability, like, that's my superpower, to be able to be transparent and to talk about that and be comfortable so that I can communicate it in a way that people understand, like, oh, okay, yeah, she's not judgmental at all. Like, yeah, she can say she made a mistake, but she's not ashamed of it. I can admit that I made some bad decisions and that I made decisions that were appalling choices, but they made me ultimately who I am today, which is a really amazing person who has a genuine heart to help people. And for that, I won't apologize. And so that's where the comfortability that you see comes from, is I'm very comfortable in what is my truth, because I know you're not gonna there ain't no paparazzi gonna pop up with something I ain't already said. So I don't have to worry about it.
Okay. I want to thank you. And I don't know if thank you covers it the way that it probably should, but I want to thank you because even though you're very comfortable, not everyone can just do what you just did. Not everyone can. And I'm grateful that you're able to do so. And I'm grateful you did it here on Black Men Talk. It's Mark Elliott. As I said earlier, Up from the Ashes is a new branch that we are placing into under the heading of When Black Men Talk. And from time to time, we will be coming up from the ashes with somebody telling their story. Thank you for giving us an air. You know, God loves you and we love you too. Take care of yourself.